There probably is nothing more confusing, bewildering, and frustrating than substrate. There are those who are firmly convinced that it is the enemy and that a bare tank is the only reasonable way to proceed. On the other side of the other end of the spectrum are those like myself who believe that substrate, a deep sand substrate, is the absolute key to a healthy aquarium. Well, let's see. Let's start with a bare tank. Lots of people have bare tanks. Some people have bare tanks and no filtration. My friend Lucas is a good example of this. And he has very healthy tanks. They are also tanks that, for the most part, house a small number of fish and a small number of plants. And they are successful. Part of what we need to understand about the substrate is based on understanding plants and how they feed. Some plants take nutrition directly out of the water. That's why you can grow water sprite and duckweed to your heart's content in a bucket. Other plants, stem plants, rooted plants, stems are a little different. They kind of work both ways. Rooted plants require substrate in order to be able to take up nutrition. Now, let's look at what happens in an aquarium that has an inch or less of gravel and is planted. For a while, a long while, the plants will languish. They won't do much of anything. Even if you put supplements in, they're still going to be slow to grow. But eventually, in time, they begin to take up nutrition and they begin to grow and thrive. Why is that? In order to understand that, you have to understand the nature of the root of the plant. A plant's root are able to create an anaerobic layer around the outside of the root that actually breaks down waste and makes it available to the plant as nutrition. So in effect, it creates its own chemical factory. Now, it can do this best in an environment that is not being constantly washed through by moving water. So as an area of the tank becomes loaded with detritus, thick with it, heavy with it, the roots are able to find a better toehold there and are able to begin producing nutrition. And then somebody comes along and cleans it all out. And this becomes the routine for maintaining a gravel tank. You clean it out over and over and over, unendingly cleaning it out. I would submit to you that instead of cleaning a gravel tank, you added 1/4 of an inch of gravel every time you got the urge to clean it. By the time it hit 4 to 6 inches, it would be maintaining an anaerobic layer that would effectively break down waste in the tank. Obviously, since the grains of gravel are larger than the grains of sand, water is going to flow through gravel at a higher rate than it does sand. So 3 to 4 inches, really 2.5 to 3.5 inches of sand is enough to create that anaerobic layer where waste breaks down and plants are able to take up nutrition. So that's kind of the key of the matter. Now, on the way down through that layer where the water is moving through the substrate, there are a whole lot of other things going on. So the deeper that substrate is, the more naturally the system can develop. If you want to have a bare tank, you're welcome to it. And if you follow the lead of those like Lucas who are doing it effectively, you will have tanks that you will be happy with, where plants are thriving. If, however, you want a heavily planted tank with lots of hardscape, rocks and driftwoods and the like, then you need to have a substrate, if for no other reason than to hold it all in place. And that's really kind of what it does. It holds it all in place. When I began studying saltwater fish for the National Aquarium, one of the first things that I discovered is research making the case that the quality of the dirt under the coral reef was commensurate with the quality of the reef itself. And these researchers were not saying that a quality reef creates a quality substrate. They were saying rather the opposite, that when the substrate was healthy, the reef was healthy. Now, research into this field has not been going on for a long time. It's maybe 20, 25 years old, if that. The reality is that the farming industry, the agriculture industry, which has the most at stake in understanding soil strata, anaerobic chemical processing, and the like, never really began studying it seriously until about the 1960s. For 25 or 30 years, that information did not make it much into the general knowledge of the general public. It certainly did not make it into the aquarium industry. And I would argue that it still hasn't. Diana Waldstead has published a book that some of you have, The Biology of the Planted Aquarium, that goes into excruciating scientific detail on exactly what happens in the substrate. It is the seminal study on aquatic substrate based on many years of her research. Suffice it to say, Diana Waldstead in some circles is not a popular person. In others, she most certainly is. I find her work, her theories, her research, and her recommendations to be fundamental to what I try to do when I create an aquarium. I think that's far enough to go this time around. If we can get that much of the message out and understood, then there won't be the fear about substrate or the insistence upon cleaning it all the time. People who don't like sand don't like it because it's hard to clean. Well, they should not be trying to clean it. The whole purpose of a sand substrate is to do away with cleaning. I have aquariums that have been set up for 20 years with a 4-inch substrate of sand. They have never once been cleaned. And when I start seeing a little detritus laying on the top, I put a little more sand in, and that takes care of the problem. Now, this tank behind me has some rather fun things going on. So I want to show you this. There's a pair of Dempseys right in the middle of it who have dug a pit to the glass and are nesting some eggs. Let's take a look. They are right down here. Should be able to see the eggs. Let's get a little more light on it. Everybody wants to get in front. Can you see the eggs? They're right on the top of the rock. Now I have a couple of hundred Jack Dempsey fry that are about a half an inch long. So I'm not going to try to save these, but look at the pit they've dug. They're all the way down to the glass. And a tank that has about 4 inches of substrate, There's no dirt in here because I've got these beasts that dig holes. But I thought this was kind of interesting. Notice that there's no aggression going on. They're keeping people away without much aggravation, protecting the middle of the tank from intruders. We'll see how it goes when they have babies, but I thought you would enjoy seeing that. Take care for now. Talk to you again soon.